What is up, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to change out the lower control arms on a GX470. Let's go. Alright, let me show you the reason why I need to change it. So if you can see on my older lower control arm, so you can see the bushings are pretty much going out. Let me turn up the ISO a little bit so you guys can check it out. See right there, it's already ripping. So that's how you know when it's time to change. So I went ahead and I got some centric lower control arms. And I'm gonna go over some of the tools that I'm gonna be using. So I'm gonna be using a sledgehammer, burger bar, torque wrench, some pliers. A needle nose plier would be preferred, but if you don't have a needle nose, I mean, this would work. Some of the sockets that we're gonna be using is a 19mm socket, 21mm for my lug nuts since I still have my stock wheels on, and 24mm socket, and a 10 and 12mm socket. Also, what else we're going to be using is this nice handy pry bar, and you're going to need some 2x4. I'll let you guys know later why. Alright, so you already know the first steps. Go ahead and take off your wheels, and also take off your front skid plates. I already went ahead and did that. That's why you need the 10 and 12mm sockets. So go ahead and do that. Alright, so the first step, we're going to go ahead and start from the bottom. So the first step, we're going to go ahead and take off the lower ball joint mounts by taking off these two bolts right here with a 19mm socket. And after that, we're going to go ahead and take off the cotter pin off this lower ball joint nut. And then we're going to go ahead and take off this nut as well with a 24mm socket. So let's go ahead and start and do that. So I'm gonna lift up the lower control arm up a little bit so that bolt can come out straight, so it doesn't cross there or something like that when it's driving out. Alrighty, so the next step is I'm gonna go ahead and take off that cotter pin and remove the lower ball joint nut. So in an event that the cotter pin might be seized or like rusted onto the nut, you can go ahead and just cut the tip off and just go ahead and take off the nut after you cut it off. But I was able to successfully take off the cotter pin. So next step is to grab 24mm socket, and we'll go ahead and take off. Once you're done taking off the 3 bolts from the lower ball joint, we're gonna go ahead and start taking off these bolts right here. So with a 19mm socket, just gonna go ahead and take it out. Yeah, if you didn't take off the skid plate, you won't be able to access this nut right here, or this bolt right here. So be sure to take off your skid plate before doing this. Just like that. we got one bolt out, and make sure you pry the other alignment piece, I guess, off. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my pry bar, and I'm gonna try to pry the alignment pieces out. There you go. The two pieces should look like this right here on the front side, along with the bolt. So don't lose this right here. All right. So once you do that, go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. You can go ahead and take off this nut right here. Alrighty. Once you take those off with a 19mm socket, this is what you should have. So just put it back together so you don't lose it. Alright, once you're done taking that off, now we can go ahead and take off the lower shock bolts. So again, with the 19mm socket, I'm gonna go ahead and take this off. Alrighty, that came off pretty easy. So go ahead and take that off, and you're gonna want to get a tool so you can punch out the bolts out, and then at the same time this tool right here, or whatever that can fit through this hole, will be holding up the lower control arm so it doesn't fall right down. Alrighty, so punch that out, and then I'm gonna grab the bolts, and I'm gonna put the washer and nut back on so I don't lose it. Okay, now once you get that off, we're gonna go ahead and use our pry bar, and we're gonna pry these section out. So I got one side out. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Alright, once you got it somewhat pried out, you can go ahead and take off the punch tool that you have on your front shocks, and you can go ahead and just wiggle it out, and just like that, it's off. Alright, so once you got the old lower control arm out, the last step is we're going to go ahead and take off this lower control arm mount, and there's a couple ways you can do it. You can get a separated tool for like 20 bucks from like Harbor Freight or something, and you can try it with that, but I feel like this is much easier. Just get two 2x4s and you place it on each end of the mount. Make sure you have some space on top of the lower ball joint, because you're going to want to pop this out. So with my trusty sledgehammer, we're going to go ahead and take it out. That came out pretty fast, and just like that, you have this piece out. So once you're done with that, alrighty, so once you got the mounts off, go ahead and grab your new lower control arm, and we're gonna go ahead and start putting it back together. So the first step is I'm going to go ahead and put the bolt in for the lower front shocks. Alright, so the first step is I'm going to go ahead and place my tool that I was using to hold the lower front shocks. I'm going to put that in, and I'm going to use this to align the hole so I can put back the bolts for the lower front shock. So the bolts for the lower front shocks go in from the back. Be sure to do that because that's how you put it in. Alright, so once we have the lower front shock bolts in, we're going to go ahead and pry this back in, and we're going to put the bolts back in on both sides. I'm going to do the best I can to align it with my hands. Alrighty, so actually just used my foot and I kind of kicked in the other side, and I finally got this to kind of align. So these bolts back in. So for the front side, this is going to be on the left side, and then this is going to be on the right side. And also a little thing, this only goes in one way because this is like shaped very uniquely that only fits in one way. So make sure you have these aligned perfectly. Alrighty. Also, you want to make sure these plates get seated properly in between these two ends that are bent 90 degrees. So once you got that aligned, go ahead and grab the bolt. You want to get it in, and start putting the bolt back in. What I did right now is I actually pulled the lower control arm out so I can align this back plate right here in between that spot so it's seated properly. So once you get it pretty hand tight, go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Alrighty, so I'll go ahead and try to align this with my hands best I can. Go ahead and grab the back bolts, and this is the way it goes in. So exactly as shown, this is how I'm going to put it in. So the nut's going to be on the back side. So I'm going to pull this out. Ready? So I'm just going to grab my little hammer and I'm just going to tap it in. Alrighty, so once you got that seated in, you want to go ahead and put this piece back on, the back plate. Now it's interesting, this back plate has like a teeth on each end, so it only goes in one way, so it makes it easier to align. Alrighty, so once you get that done, now we're gonna go ahead and put back on the lower ball joint mounts, as well as the castle nut for the lower ball joint and the cotter pin. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and put back on the lower ball joint mounts. So So it's gonna go this way. This is how we're gonna put it on for the passenger side. So go ahead and grab the castle nut and go ahead and put back in the nut. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my 24mm socket again, and just gonna we're gonna go ahead and put back the bolts for the 2 bolts on the side for the mounts. Alright, so the easiest way for me to align it is to look from the bottom. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my flashlight. I'm just gonna peek on the bottom and kind of align it from the top. Go ahead and grab the 2 bolts as well as some Loctite. Again, looks like they were using red Loctite, so if you can, go ahead and go get red, but I only have blue at the moment. Alright, so once you get some Loctite in it, go ahead and thread the bolt back in. It's always good practice to actually hand thread in as much as you can to avoid stripping anything, because I know I stripped a bunch of stuff before. Alrighty, so now that that's pretty tight, I'm gonna go ahead and go back with my impact in. I'm just gonna give it a little bit of ugga-duggas. I'm not gonna torque it down yet, but I just want to give it a couple good drives in. So the last step is I'm gonna go ahead and put my wheels back on, and then we're gonna go ahead and torque everything down. So I'm just gonna give you guys the torque specs now. So for the 2 bolts on the lower ball joint mount, that's going to be torqued down to 118 pounds, and the castle nut right here that's holding the lower ball joint, that is 103 foot-pounds of torque. And then the nuts and bolts for the front lower shocks is 100 foot-pounds of torque. And then the lower control arm inner bolts, that's right here, we're going to go ahead and torque that down to 100 foot-pounds of torque. But before I put my wheels back on, I'm actually gonna go ahead and torque down my lower ball joint, just because I don't think I can reach it with my socket once I have the wheels on. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my jack, and I'm gonna jack it up. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my torque wrench and set it to 103 foot-pounds of torque, along with my 24mm socket, and I'm gonna go ahead and torque it down. Alrighty, so once I got that torqued down, you want to go ahead and make sure you align the castle nut properly so you can put the cotter pin back in. Alright, once I got my cotter pin in, I'm gonna go ahead and bend one of the cotter pins. You can use a sledgehammer to get it nice and seated. Alrighty, so the last step is to pretty much torque down the rest. I'm gonna go ahead and put the car down, and then we can go ahead and torque down the inner bolt, the bolts on the lower front shock, and the 2 bolts on the lower ball joint mount. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab my torque wrench and my 19mm socket, and we're gonna go ahead and start with the inner bolt on the lower control arm. So we're gonna go ahead and torque that down to 100 foot-pounds of torque. Alrighty, so I got that done. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So we're gonna torque it to the same 100 foot-pounds of torque on this end as well. All right. Woo. Bolts. Now we can go ahead and move on to the lower bolts for the front shocks. So I'm also going to torque that down to 100 foot-pounds of torque as well. Alrighty. The last, very last step, the last thing to torque down is the 2 bolts on the lower ball joint mounts. So I'm gonna go ahead and torque those down to 118 foot-pounds of torque. Ready? 1 click. Let's get the other side torque down as well. Alrighty. Now, after you torque that down, you're pretty much good to go. I would say this is probably one of the easier mods. I'd say it's easier than doing the lift kit. So if you were to do the lift kit your own, you're pretty much more than capable of doing this yourself. It's not too bad, actually. Especially, the hardest part I would say is probably taking out that lower ball joint mount. Now, there are several ways to do it, but I found that this method that I did was the easiest for me. But you know, give it a try. Let me know if it helped you guys out. If it did, please hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Peace.